Hello and welcome again to Talk Ottawa. Thanks for tuning in, and you may be pleased to know that we have something a little different for you tonight. No panel of politicians or pundits this time. Instead, we have one man who has embarked on an adventure in art, and not the kind you usually find in museums. Have a look at this.
Really, storytelling, when you boil it down, is do interesting things happen to characters we care about.
It is the traditional litmus test for a good yarn, but the yarn spinner is anything but traditional. His name is Vaughan Allan, and you could call him a storyteller for the 21st century. He writes graphic novels, a sort of long-format comic for adult tastes, and his marketing is a do-it-yourself enterprise with the internet as his bookstore.
It's really tough because fundamentally I am my own publicist, and that's been one of the tough things in this whole thing is I write, I draw, and now I have to market myself.
And when Allan markets himself, in a way, he's marketing his life. His first opus, The Road to God Knows Where, deals with a teenage girl growing up with a schizophrenic mother. It draws heavily on Allan's Ottawa upbringing by troubled parents, and bringing it to fruition was almost as long a journey.
I came to art very, very late. Compared to most people who learned to draw when they were 3 or 4, I learned to draw when I was 25, 26. So I am kind of different than a lot of artists.
But Allan has made up for lost time by being a tireless self-promoter in a notoriously tough market.
It's a job. And for me, it's a full-time job. That doesn't mean it's not a fun job. It doesn't mean I don't, get up excited or what have you. But I draw Monday to Friday, feeling good, not feeling good. If I'm having a good day, if I'm having a bad day, every day.
Old-fashioned work ethic, newfangled medium. That's the road ahead for Vaughan Allan. Our focus tonight on Talk Ottawa. And joining us now in the flesh is the author of The Road to God Knows, Vaughan Allan. And thank you very much for coming in, Vaughan.
Oh, you're very welcome.
I think we should start maybe with a primer on graphic novels, just in case any of the uninitiated are out there. A lot of us grew up with comics, and we grew up thinking that comics are something you find in the Saturday papers, maybe Family Circus if you're really unlucky,
yeah,
or Iron Man. But a graphic novel is something else. What is it?
Well, graphic novels can be really anything. Like primarily they're long-form comic book stories. So most people who are reading comics would read comics that were about 22 pages in length, came out in a periodical form, particularly in the 1950s and 60s. They'd find them on magazine stands, and then in the mid-1970s, comic book shops that were actually sort of dedicated to these things started forming. But graphic novels took a longer time, and really, they can be any length. They're just, usually they come with a spine, which is an odd thing to say. Usually they come with an ISBN now, and you can find them at bookstores, comic book shops, certainly online. And one of the things I love about them is that the subject matter is far more diverse than what would be typically found in a regular old comic. And by that I mean superhero comics. And there's nothing wrong with superhero comics, but superhero comics are one particular genre in a far more diverse medium. In North America, the genre and medium have tended to be confused, and people will tend to think of comics as superheroes. They can be so much more, and graphic novels really open the floodgates of any possibilities of what they can be.
So you told one of our producers when we were talking to you earlier in your home that when it came right down to it, you had to define yourself, you said, I'm a comics guy.
Yeah.
And you have a background with comics. You read the superheroes when you were a kid, probably still do.
Yep.
Now, so when you decided to take the plunge into the world of art and to actually put your hand down to this, why did you decide to go this way? Why not try to break into Marvel or DC and write superhero comics? Why not write comic strips? Why graphic novels?
Well, first of all, breaking into Marvel and DC is really hard. It's not an easy thing to do. You have to have a portfolio that's sort of set up in a particular way, and it's a very expressive, very dynamic style of storytelling. And it's awfully hard. It's hard to do it as a Canadian. It's not impossible. A lot of people will move down to New York City still in this day and age to do it. And there's a lot of competition. Comics aren't, particularly with what Marvel and DC put out, it's really hard to be a solo creator. It's very, very rare for those companies to have a single writer-artist doing one title. There are some people who've started there and have grown, like Frank Miller, who did Sin City, did
The Dark
300.
Knight, Batman.
Yeah, exactly. He started writing and drawing with Daredevil and then sort of moved on. So when I looked at it, I knew it was going to be really, a really tough challenge. I'd be competing with a lot of different people. And superheroes, as much as I enjoy them, I just kind of felt that doing that type of story, really to start off with, wasn't for me. I wanted to try doing some other stuff, and I really wanted to try writing to start off with. And I always came to art a little bit late, so I always thought I'd do writing of some sort anyway.
Right.
And writing and drawing, telling my own stories is really what I enjoy the most. So when I came up with a story, I think it has heart. I think it's got some, decent characters, and I decided to, with the support of my wife, to pursue this end.
Right.
I'm not sure exactly how it's how it's going and how it's going to play out, but I mean, part of the fun, part of the challenge is trying.
Now, what were you doing when this came upon you? As you mentioned in the piece that opened the show,
right.
You came to this late,
Yeah.
which actually begs the question a lot of people would ask, hey, aren't artists born, not made? How'd that work out?
I really don't believe that. I really don't. I've had debates. I've had arguments with artists that have drawn. I mean, I never drew as a kid. I mean, I'm sure I toddled and drew with a crayon and what have you, but I was never the kid in the back of a high school class doodling away, while totally ignoring what the teacher
Right.
was saying. I ran a bookstore. I thought I had pretensions of maybe being a writer and doing scripts, and part of it was a lack of self-confidence. I grew up pretty poor. Art does take some money, to get the materials together, and I didn't have a lot of self-confidence to do it. And the bookstore actually was a really transformative experience from the point of view that I started meeting not just writers, but I met other artists, sometimes, cover designers, this kind of thing, graphic designers, and then also, actual practicing artists.
Right.
And I really learned, and I always say this, is I felt so incredibly naive that artists don't get hit with a magic wand when they pop out of the womb. It takes work. They have bad days. They sometimes have bad weeks. And when you actually start looking at how an artist works, and you can actually, not that I spent loads of time with other artists, but when you're discussing some of the frustrations, it's work. They have bad days. They learn to figure out that creativity, particularly for ones who are able to make a career out of it. You don't, generally, unless you're some mad genius, you don't draw when you feel like it, or you don't produce art when you feel like it. There has to be a sense of craft. There has to be a sense of discipline to it. And a light bulb kind of went off for me, and I literally sat down with Betty Edwards' Drawing on the Right Side of the Brain when I was 25 years old.
It's a how-to book.
It's a how-to book, and I started, and I was like, I'm not really sure. I just started at nights and on weekends and stuff, and I really wasn't sure where it was going to go. And one thing I stumbled upon at around the same time was a line of, just basically suck less. So you start, you're terrible, you get a little less terrible, and you try not to tie your self-esteem to it too much. You try not to beat yourself up too much on the bad days. You try not to get too high when you have a good day.
Yeah.
And things start happening. And that's basically what it was, is I had terribly rotten days that I thought I would stink at it forever, and then I had another day or another little cycle where I actually was, this isn't half bad, this is okay.
So at this point, surely you must have been, when you decided that this was going to be the gig and that you were going to focus all your energies on this, because there was a little overlap when you were still, managing the bookstore, right? And I guess that took a bit too much out of you.
The bookstore was tough. I mean, it's an independent bookstore. Independent bookstores, as most people know, certainly industry people would know, it's a tough thing. I mean, we had a lot of competition from chapters. We've certainly had a lot of competition from online, like Amazon and whatnot. Yeah. And it's hard. Part of what makes independent bookstores fun is that it's a sense of community. It's a sense of the staff knowing, individual tastes from customers and being able to pinpoint books. I did all the buying, so it really was interesting to see things that I ordered in actually selling. But it's a lot of work. It's a lot of work. There's not a lot of money in it. I mean, it's not about money, but there's not a lot of money into it. And what was really coming to at the end of the day was it wasn't that satisfying anymore. I kind of felt that I had sort of proved the point, and the next step, I had gotten as high as I could go. I managed an independent bookstore. Yeah. You either buy it, or open up one yourself, or that's it. There's no vertical mobility. And I was starting to, I don't know if burned out is quite the right word, but I was starting to get a little bit frustrated that I had tried, felt I had sort of succeeded. I had learned from my mistakes. I made a lot of mistakes. Sure.
But it's still a steady job. Did you kind of have your heart in your mouth when you decided to walk away from that and take a plunge into comic art, which, let's face it, Ottawans don't normally think of themselves as people who are going to go out and conquer the comics world on a moment's notice.
I felt that way, and I still do, because it is still a crapshoot, and it's I've been lucky in the sense that I have a very supportive. Samantha, my wife, is very, very supportive, and she has a decent enough job that we've been able to make ends meet. I mean, you have to eat, and I am not one. I will never be one for you do things you love, you do things because you enjoy it, you sacrifice as much as you can reasonably, but you have to survive. You have to be able to pay rent, you have to be able to pay bills, and you have to be able to eat and have some fun. Yeah. And if I ever felt that my art was truly getting in the way of our ability to do that, then I would figure out something else to do and still do it part-time or what have you, but it wouldn't be full-time, it wouldn't be fair. So
well, still, it's quite a leap to take, and especially these days, we've got a job market that's fluctuating, from moment to moment, and people who can never expect to cash in their chips and get a gold watch from the company they worked for since they were 20. People are always looking for the next opportunity, and this is, I think a dream come true for a lot of people who maybe did draw when they were 6 years old as well.
Well, I remember talking to, I've only done a little bit of art instruction. Some people might rag me out on that, but I remember talking to one teacher, and he felt pretty strongly that something makes you stop. And either you get insecure, particularly for the kids, unlike me, who drew voraciously, drew all the time, drew on their parents' walls and whatnot, for those that stop, something makes you stop. And either you get insecure, either you can't make the living you'd like to do, either there's no market for your work. I mean, something makes people stop. And, everybody has to make really a personal decision at a fundamental level if this is something they want to try doing full-time or something that is going to be a hobby. It's hard, and I mean, art is unforgiving. It is a cruel mistress, but she is her own rewards, and it's not easy. I mean, I'll never sort of paraphrase it, or joke about it with that. From that point of view, it is not an easy thing to do, but I really don't believe you tie your self-esteem to work. And I mean, I've never understood artists. I will never be Van Gogh, lopping off my ear, with some of the anguish. And part of it is you never know. I mean, Van Gogh is actually an example I really like to use, because he really wasn't a very successful artist in his lifetime.
Wasn't a very happy man either.
No, and I mean that's a huge part of it too, right? You have to enjoy what you're doing, and I will always say that as much as a particular painting or drawing might frustrate me, I really love what I'm doing.
Well, when we come back, we want to talk about what you've been working on feverishly these past couple of years that is now on the internet and hopefully coming to printed publication sometime in the near future. That is, of course, The Road to God Knows, and you've got plenty to say about the origins of that particular work in your own personal life. We are talking to Vaughn Allan, the creator of The Road to God Knows. Right now, it's an online graphic novel. It's a medium that a lot of people aren't accustomed to yet, but you may be getting accustomed to it just by watching this show. So, we will be back in about 2 minutes here on Talk Ottawa with Vaughn Allan, and we will see you then.
Coffee and refreshments for this show are provided by Tim Hortons, Rogers TV, Tim Hortons, together making good things happen.
There's more than one way to join the discussion on Talk Ottawa. Just log on to rogerstv.com, follow show listings to Talk Ottawa, and send us an email with your thoughts or ideas. We want to hear from you on Talk Ottawa, the right choice for your voice. The Art of Vaughn Allan. You will find it on girlamatic.com or vaughnallan.com through the links. Vaughn Allan is a graphic novelist. He is working in a medium that is still becoming familiar to the public at large, and that medium is going out through another medium that is not a familiar venue for works of art, which is to say the internet. Fascinating story and a fascinating background of the story. So again, Vaughn Allan, creator of The Road to God Knows. This graphic novel, it concerns the story of Marie, who's a teenage girl who's kind of learning about the world and about herself, and she's got this monolith in her life, a sad one, which is to say that her mother is mentally ill. And coming to grips with that, I guess, is a large part of it. Could you tell me about the story? Just lead us through the story and tell us how you came to it.
Well, I mean, the story itself, it is fiction, but it is about a teen girl really coming to grips with her mom's schizophrenia. So there's been a suspicion within her that's kind of hinted at in the narrative that things haven't been that great with her mom, and just before the story starts, things sort of really go downhill for her mom, and she's trying to pick up the pieces, and picking up the pieces, being confronted with things that she's never seen before, never experienced before, and trying to cope with it as best she can. And what she's learning is that there's no easy answers for it, and what I've tried to do with the story is not cure mental illness, not try to make it some type of naive, very optimistic, happy ending. It doesn't have a terrible negative ending either, but mental illness is not something that it's still very much taboo in our society, and it's not something that anybody can deal with in a very easy way. So particularly when you're a teenager, boy or girl, trying to figure out, trying to live your life, trying to discover everything that a teenager discovers, and coming to grips with everything that's happening in your own life, and then dealing with this on top of it is very tough. And it is one of those things that you don't see. It happens to a lot of people. We don't discuss it very much. And I really wanted to try dealing with that.
Is that why you came to this particular narrative, this story, as the subject of your first graphic novel?
Partially. I mean, I certainly think that it is really relevant, but by the same token, I mean, it's something that speaks to me personally. I mean, I went through this, and in that sense, the story is sort of a fictional biography.
Well, tell me about that. How did you come to this? What do we find of you in Marie, and what do we find of your life in
quite a bit? Like my mom died when I was 20, so she died at 48. There's always problems with the diagnosis of schizophrenia, but she had a number of nervous breakdowns. She was diagnosed this way, and there was a lot of mental illness. And very much like Marie, who is like a female version of me in a way. How to say it? I wound up, over time seeing friends' parents, seeing friends' families, the ones that kind of worked, the ones that didn't work so well. Yeah, I started to realize that everything isn't right with my mom. And probably unlike Marie, there wasn't sort of a magic moment where it just happened. I just gradually became aware that things weren't all right, and things got worse for my mom as I got older. One of the regrets I have, but it's almost not a regret because it's life's life, is right. I wish I had been a bit older. Maybe I could have helped her a little bit more. Probably not, because one of the things with mental illness is it's everybody's personal purgatory. It's very difficult. Nobody can really, you can offer support to a point, but I was a kid, and there's only so much a kid can do. And I've never had any real problems differentiating that. I miss my mom. I think my mom never saw me draw. My mom died before I picked up a pencil. So, that kind of thing I regret, but it's, she was a remarkably strong woman too. And to the question of why this story was something that spoke to me. It was a story that I didn't really see represented in comics very much. And it was a story that I thought, when you're trying to do something new, I mean, there's risks in doing something new, but at least would be different. It would be different than a lot of what else is out there, and that can hurt a work, but I think it also can help, elevate a work as well. And I really wanted to do a story for my first book because I knew how hard. I mean, I ran a bookstore. I wasn't under any illusions about how hard it is to break in. Yeah. I wanted to do a story that would be just something that I could stand behind no matter what. I mean,
writing what you know.
Writing what you know. I mean, I really do believe it, and drawing what you know. And I know I was going to get better. I know I was going to become a stronger artist. You can't wait for a magical day when that day is here. So you get your skills as good they are, writing and drawing, and you take a shot. You go. And I'll always say this, is no matter whatever happens with Road, I'll stand behind that book. I mean, if it gets published, great. If I make $1 million, fantastic. If I make nothing, that's okay too. It's something that it was very personal to me, and I believe very strongly in the characters.
Not to indulge in armchair psychology, far be it, but it tends to be the case that when children grow up with parents that are in trouble in one way or another, especially single parents, there's a sense that you kind of alluded to before that, I wish I could have helped. I wish I could have done something. You find people, 8, 9, 10 years old, and they're in their mind taking on adult responsibilities. They're saying, I should be taking care of my mom, I should be making it different. Is there any sense that you would know of maybe a little bit of guilt that hangs over from that, and maybe I can fix it if I make myself into Marie and like rewrite the story?
I had to confront guilt on a personal level pretty well just before my mom died. I made the decision that I wanted to move out, and part of it was the home life wasn't very good. I had just started at the bookstore that I would eventually start running, and I wanted to live my own life. Yeah. And by making that decision, I knew that I'd be leaving my mom alone, and she would have to sort of manage her life as best she could. I moved out in July, and she died in October. Right. And the last time I saw her alive, it was very clear that things weren't quite right. She was having really big problems with perceptions of time. She didn't think that much time had passed since I had moved out. It was really odd. It was really weird. It was bloody uncomfortable. But and then when she died, I had to deal with what if I had stayed? This probably wouldn't have happened, maybe, if I had stayed. And it eats at you a little bit, but I really realized that I have a right to live my own life. Yeah. And I have to, I deserve that. It doesn't make it, I'm not happy with how things turned out for her, but if the price had been me instead, or at least a part of like an emotional side of me or a psychological side of me, that's not really a price I was willing to pay. I think some people might call that selfish. I tend to think of it as a reasonably healthy selfishness. Survival. I was 20 years old. Yeah. There was different things I wanted to do. But I regret that we didn't get to talk much as adults. I regret that, she never got to see me do artwork or anything. And it's, but I don't regret moving out. And and it was an interesting thing, is when that hit me, when I was sort of in mourning and, dealing with the circumstances, and money was a big problem at the time because there was no life insurance or anything like that for my mom. So it was, when I was sort of confronting all this stuff, it hit me, through tears and grief and whatnot, that it just hit me that I don't regret moving out. And that really helped.
So when we look at the work of fiction, that's based on a bedrock of real experience, yes. But this is a different life. Marie's life is a different life. Yeah. Was Marie's life tweaked in such a way as to maybe create closure where there was none in the real story, or to tidy things up, or to maybe produce a more positive outcome?
Well, one of the things I did with the narrative, though this is online, this has not been completely revealed yet, is the conclusion's not there yet, is I wanted Marie I wanted the story and the idea with the situation with her and her mom not to ever be really resolved. Yeah. So the idea is that when you finish the book, Marie is stronger, she's in a stronger place, but things haven't changed that much for her mom. Right. And you don't really know what happens next. And I wrestled with it because I didn't want to wrap up schizophrenia in a bow and be like, end the problem, there you go, happy ever after. I certainly didn't want that to have happen, but I also didn't want there to be some type of animosity or hatred or some type of big explosion that was a huge melodrama or a soap opera. I wanted to bring them to hopefully an emotional place where Marie is pretty well an adult now, but on an emotional level and psychological level. And while her mom isn't okay, she's more okay with her mom not being okay than she was when the story started, if that makes sense. Yeah. So it's tough because no kid can really cope with schizophrenia, can cope with mental illness in a way that that makes sense. It's just your life, and you try to live it. So there was no way to wrap things up or even give it a conclusion, or even a wishful conclusion in my life that would have been true to the characters and would have been true to the story.
But all the same, do you find that, was it hard to write that? Was it emotionally difficult territory, or was it cathartic?
It was both. I mean, it was weird to revisit it. It was weird to revisit it in fiction. One question that sort of popped up halfway through it was, would my mom like this? Yeah. And I was like, you know what? I'm not so sure. I was kind of scratching my head going, I don't know if she would, Marie's mom isn't my mom, but partially because I'm fictionalizing certain events and I'm playing with time a lot. I mean, that's one of the big things that's different, is the things that happened in my life happened over years. The things that happened in Marie's life are quite compressed. So I took a lot of events, and some fiction, some not, and sort of compressed them into a narrative that takes place over about a month. Yeah. But I don't know if my mom would like this. I'm not so sure my mom would. I think she would respect my personal viewpoint on it and trying to maybe capture what a kid's perceptions are of this type of stuff. I'm not so sure my mom would be like, yeah, you got it. I suspect my mom would be like, no, you're way off on this part, damn it. Yeah, no, you missed this completely.
So the dialogue still goes on.
Yeah, I don't think it'll ever end either. I mean, it's partially because I never got quite the resolution in my own life with it. There's no simple way of answering it. So I mean, some people have asked me, can you do a sequel? Is there a way to continue the story? And I was like, well, I could follow Marie's story, which is interesting, but there's no real way to follow, the relationship between her and her mom and sort of continue it, because I'm capturing elements from my life and some fictional elements, and I think it would be really challenging to try to, pick that up and do the same thing or somehow continue it. I'm very happy with how it ends.
Yeah. Well, here, this may sound like a silly question, but was it a tough decision to put it in Ottawa? This book is very clearly Ottawa-based.
Yeah.
It's, I mean, the splash, or the first page has big panels of Parliament Hill, and the streetscapes are recognizable. It's like, oh, that looks like a couple of back streets behind Elgin or near Bronson. Was that a difficult decision? Did you think about making it something more generic, more American, more market-friendly?
A little at first, because I had to do design work. And I mean, that's one of the things with graphic novels, or even comics, to be fair, is that, you write the script, but then you have to do sort of, basically pre-production. You have to sketch out the characters, figure out what they look like, figure out what their world is like, what the buildings are, sort of the key set pieces. And I wrestled with it a bit, and I was kind of like, no, I like Ottawa. I really enjoy the city. It's too hot. I really do enjoy the city. And it was important to me to put it in a place that was recognizable. It's a bit of a nod, maybe a little egocentric, but it is a bit of a nod to where I come from. And Ottawa hasn't been represented in comics very much either, so it was kind of neat.
If at all, has it? I mean, apart from the odd issue of Canadian superheroes like Captain Canuck or Alpha Flight, have you ever seen Ottawa in a comic?
No.
Well, you've done it.
So it was neat to do it, and I mean, I always call it a fictional Ottawa. It is Ottawa. I mean, the story, it's not hitting the reader over the head. The story is not really taking place in the present. It's taking place in around 87, 88. Yeah. And there's a few little touches that imply that. But I mean, I wanted Ottawa to be an Ottawa that I kind of remember, an Ottawa that, I'm playing with a little bit. And I didn't want to be, going out and getting exact reference of every single thing either, taking photos and really referencing it. As I wanted to create sort of a spirit of a place and call it Ottawa, and I think some people will be like, you nailed it, and other people will be like, that's not the Ottawa I know, you got it way wrong.
I don't know, it's the most recognizably Ottawa comic art I've ever seen, frankly. You don't find the postcards. In those odd comic books, as a matter of fact, a hero of yours, John Byrne, a Canadian artist who drew Alpha Flight, the first Canadian superhero team. When you see Ottawa in a John Byrne book, here's Parliament Hill or some generic building that's supposed to be the Department of National Defense or whatever. In the pages of The Road to God Knows, that looks like Ottawa. You may not know which back street that is, but you've been there. You may not know which storefront that is, but you've seen it.
Well, that's kind of what I was going for. And I also was like really making sure I didn't put in like street signs or anything like that. Like I didn't want to have it to pin it down that exactly. I will say, to be fair to John Byrne, when you're doing superheroes, you're doing Canada's superhero team, it's got to be, Parliament buildings. It's got to be the Peace Tower. That's it. For me, because it's a much more of a slice of life story, I wanted to show the back alleys. I wanted to show some of the rougher parts of Ottawa, some of the nicer parts too. Yeah. And I wanted to try to balance it a little bit more than I think somebody like John Byrne probably could. But I get away with that. He might not have been, because I think if he had just shown everyday, ordinary sights of, Sasquatch walking down a back street of Ottawa, the American readers would have been like, really? Yeah. Okay.
Here's Puck walking into the Mayflower.
Yeah, exactly. I don't think anybody would buy it.
No, not in the Marvel universe anyway. No, I mean, you don't see the Incredible Hulk hanging out in streets that you recognize. Yeah. But, well, you know something, Vaughn? You may do for Ottawa what David Cronenberg did for Toronto back in the 70s. That's something we'll take up when we come back from the break. We're talking to Vaughn Allan, comic artist, graphic novelist, the author of The Road to God Knows. You can catch his work through the links at vaughnallan.com. That's vaughnallan.com, and we will be back in about 2 minutes with more. See you in a minute.
This program is brought to you by Rogers Home Phone, a better home phone service built around you. And by Rogers High-Speed Internet. Welcome to the Worldwide You.
There's more than one way to join the discussion on Talk Ottawa. Just log on to rogerstv.com, follow show listings to Talk Ottawa, and send us an email with your thoughts or ideas. We want to hear from you on Talk Ottawa, the right choice for your voice. This is Vaughn Allan's artwork. You can check that out at girlamatic.com, or you can go through Vaughn Allan's website at vaughnallan.com. He is the author of a graphic novel called The Road to God Knows. It's the story of Marie, who is a young Ottawa teenage girl who has a schizophrenic mother and a bit of a difficult life, a lot of challenges, a lot to learn about herself, a lot to learn about life in general, and we learn a lot about that in this graphic novel. It's not an idiom you may be familiar with. Maybe your novels come 180 pages, packed with print, but this is another way of approaching it, and arguably, Vaughn, it's in sync with the modern world. Graphic novels have been around for a while. As a matter of fact, the ones that I remember from my youth were the early graphic novels of superheroes, which just meant taking a year's worth of issues and cramming them together. But not the same thing. This is actually telling a real human story with nuance and with complexity and with feeling, and the kind of stuff traditionally reserved for print literary novels, and putting it into an idiom that may be more understandable to a society that just doesn't read anymore.
Well, I mean, because I was a bookstore guy, I do believe that people do read and read fiction. I don't think fiction is going anywhere, but comics, particularly long-form comics, I mean, what do graphic novels do? One of the first things they allow you to do is tell a longer story. I could never tell a story like this in 22 pages. And if I even did it as a monthly book, which I sort of debated when I was coming up with the idea, is you'd have to have a cliffhanger, some reason to hook them to come back, and it's tough. I didn't think the story...
when you're not using a superhero. They're the ones who tend to hang off the cliffs.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, I mean, it would have been tough for me to do it that way, and I just decided to take the leap and not worry about that. It was going to be too tough. But because the medium of comics can be anything, they can tell any type of story, and they can tell any type of story, or almost any type of story, as differently as literature and film can, and they can do it differently. One of the things that makes comics work, and one of the things I always try to work with in the art, is what happens between the panels, like the gutter space between panel A and panel B. That space is incredibly important. It's so important, in fact, that it's what makes comics work.
What do you mean by that?
Well, if I did a drawing of a guy standing beside the driver's side of a car, and then the next panel he's inside the car, not me, the reader, has figured out that he got in the car and drove away.
Like the edit in a film.
Like an edit in a film, but film. I mean, unless there's an edit, film can actually show that motion. They can show the guy open the car door, sit down in the driver's seat, put the seatbelt on, drive away. Literature can describe that. Comics, we have to show it, and we have to pick sort of the action spot. And I don't mean action from like superheroes, but just the beat of conveying as much visual information in a way that the reader understands that also progresses the story forward. That's, in a way, the art of comics, but it's bloody hard. It's really difficult to do that. How I view things and how the reader view things may be entirely different. And that means that if I'm not very clear in what I'm trying to convey, and yet hopefully doing it in an artistic, maybe stylized way, the story won't work. Because if you're the reader and if you're like, how'd that guy get in that car? It doesn't look like a car to me, or is he in the passenger side or the driver's side? If I blow it, and it's really on me, if I blow that, then the reader gets pulled out of the story. The story doesn't work anymore. So, trying to do this, trying to figure out a way to do it, trying to do it in a way that's, I'm not spending days on days trying to solve the problem, so that I'm drawing economically, and the story has to finish at some point. I have to sort of try to stick to a page a day as much as I can. If it doesn't work, it completely doesn't work, and the whole story falls apart.
So is that another one of these things that you literally had to sit down and make a study of it and figure out the mechanics and say, oh, I see she's doing this here and he's doing that there, so that's how you make a transition from this to that? Or is there a feel to it?
There's a feel. It is really feel. A lot of the feel came at the script stage, let alone, or sort of even before the art stage, was trying to figure out, what would work, and then I would start drawing. And because again, this was sort of the advantage of writing it, is because I wrote it, when I started drawing it, I could go, oh, the way I conceived that in my head when I wrote it actually doesn't work that well.
Yeah.
A really good example of that is on page 5 of the story. There's a big splash page of Marie introducing her character to the reader. That was never in the script.
Right.
I drew it and I got to that page and I went, I've not really established who the main character is.
Okay.
And I really should do that. I just never thought of that when I was scripting it, and I decided as the artist guy that I actually have to put this in. So things happen, and you try to make it work, and getting that gutter space to work properly. So it's called storytelling is trying to get two disparate images working in connection is really the art of comics. And human beings have been struggling with this forever. You go back to hieroglyphics, trying to communicate visual ideas or communicating ideas in a visual way is remarkably challenging. But when it works, it's the rhythm of the story and the people lose themselves in the story it's magic. It's amazing.
It's interesting. Once upon a time, and ironically, back when films were still brand new, back in the early part of the last century, when directors like D.W. Griffith were getting around to using shots going from the long shot to the medium shot to the close-up to the transition shot, what they call a jump cut. People were saying you can't do that. If you don't show somebody walking down the street, going in the door and then climbing the stairs, if you just cut from the street to the room upstairs, people won't know how he got there.
Yeah.
They'll be confused.
Yeah.
But people figured that out. But of all things, in your time, Hollywood directors started drawing comics to make their films. They call them storyboards. But they draw the comic first. They draw the graphic novel of the film first, and then they shoot it pretty much panel by panel.
Yeah, absolutely. And it's amazing. It catches people by surprise is when you actually stop and analyze your reaction to film, to a comic, and when you really start deducing, do you follow what's happening? Are you ever confused?
Yeah.
The few times I've talked to high school kids, talking about art and writing comics and drawing comics, this is one of the things I always ask is, when you're watching something on TV, you're watching a movie, you're watching the new George Lucas flick or what have you, or you're reading a book, do you understand how you got to point A to point B to point C? And if you don't, why? Was it because you're not paying attention, or is it because the storytellers, whatever medium it is, blew it? And you try not to blow it all that often, and you try to not blow it for most people, and there's always going to be a few people that you lose. Frank Miller has talked a lot about, when he was going up with Daredevil, he was sort of told over and over again that what works in comics would never work in film. Would never work in film. And it's laughable now. It is totally laughable because we've seen Sin City, we've seen 300, we've seen a lot of his visual ideas get incorporated in the early Batman movies, and they work remarkably well. And one of the things I love about comics is comics, when they work the best, even in an abstract way. Some artists I'm fairly realistic, some artists are way more cartoony or way more abstract, like Bill Sienkiewicz, where you can hardly tell what's going on sometimes, but the story still works. If the story works, then it's worked. And art styles don't matter, whoever the writer is, if it's the same person as the artist, if it's a different person, it doesn't matter because the story worked. And if the creators can bring you, or if the single creator can bring you into a world and tell you a story, and you can follow it, and you can lose yourself in it, it's wonderful. That's all I aspire to do.
The irony is that, being somebody who managed a bookstore, somebody who's familiar with the world of letters and the people who populate it, you chose what amounts to screenplays and storyboards.
Yeah.
Instead. Well, why was that the idiom? Why didn't you sit down and write an autobiographical novel?
What I learned very quickly when I was running the bookstore and thinking about writing and stuff like that, and I got into comics when I first moved to Ottawa when I was 8 years old. I was born in Arnprior, moved to Ottawa, my mom brought me here, and some neighborhood friends got me in. One of them's got a PhD now, got me into comics. And I just fell in love with them. But I never thought I could draw. And that's, again, the self-esteem thing. Never thought I could draw. And every time I wrote, even when I was in high school and doing terrible writing and stuff like that, I tended to do it visually, and I tended to do it with a lot of dialogue. Yeah. And when I got into the bookstore and still mucking around with writing in my spare time and whatnot, I found that I kept on coming back to plays and screenplays. But I kept coming back to that in a very visual way. And I guess I could have tried to become a playwright or a script writer or what have you, but because I was meeting artists at the same time and because I loved comics, I want to try this. If I blow it, fine, I'll blow it. I tried, I can at least say I tried. But I want to try this. And it's taken time. It's taken a long time, and it's I keep working at it, and I've learned that you never get better. You do, but you keep extending horizons further. So I'm way better than I was when I started.
Yeah.
But I still hope I can get better than this, and you keep getting stronger, and better is a very subjective, personal thing. But you keep pushing boundaries. You keep trying to get stronger, and it hasn't comics. Art, I like it a lot, and it hasn't beaten me down. I've never gotten to a point where I'm like, I quit, that's it, screw it, I don't care anymore. It's gotten me, it really, I have bad days, but man, I really enjoy doing it.
Is that basically the thing that still fires you through this process at the moment?
Yeah, that's it. I've never felt that getting on, going to work, sitting down at my drawing board is an absolute chore.
Right.
And because of that, I keep going.
Well, we're going to keep going when we come back from the break. We're talking to Vaughn Allan, graphic novelist and the author of The Road to God Knows. We will be joining you, or you will be joining us when we come back. See you in a minute.
Coffee and refreshments for this show are provided by Tim Hortons, Rogers TV, Tim Hortons, together making good things happen.
There's more than one way to join the discussion on Talk Ottawa. Just log on to rogerstv.com, follow show listings to Talk Ottawa, and send us an email with your thoughts or ideas. We want to hear from you on Talk Ottawa, the right choice for your voice.
If you had to tell the story of your life, or maybe even a reasonable facsimile, would it look like this? Well, probably not if you're not Vaughn Allan, but the artwork that you're seeing from The Road to God Knows, which is currently an online graphic novel. It will be published, I assume, in the near future. In the meantime, you can catch it through the links at vaughnallan.com. That's vaughnallan.com. And Vaughn, again, great to have you with us. I've seen your work via the internet. You're working in a medium, comics, which is traditionally a newsprint medium, or Baxter paper, whatever, depending on how much money you have. But this, so far, is something that you have rolled out over the internet, first on your own website, and now through a website which is exclusively a showcase for comics called girlamatic.com. And again, viewers can find that through you can find the links for girlamatic.com through vaughnallan.com. But why the internet? Why is this the way that the comic has been presented to the world? Is this the wave of the future, or is it something more complicated than that?
Well, I think it's both. I do think the great thing about the internet is it's remarkably democratic. You have a way, unlike traditional book form publishing, that you can create space and people can find you. And they can find you in a way you think of, like, Oprah Book Club, books piled high, where somebody else's book is spined in the back corner somewhere. The internet gives you the potential for visibility, the potential for developing an audience, particularly an audience that's disparate. They can be everywhere. So in that sense, I do think it's the wave of the future. It's not been totally figured out yet. I mean, people haven't quite figured out a way to make a living doing it. It's worked pretty damn well for bands, because MP3s is technology that's very, very similar to how we've listened to music anyway. It's not that different downloading an MP3 and listening into an iPod than it is in listening to it on a CD with headphones on. It translates very, very closely. Comics, prose, that kind of thing online, it's a different reading experience. Amazon has been getting some, interesting stuff done with the Kindle, but there's still resistance to, reading a piece of plastic and reading a screen and sitting down there. You can't do it in a tub. It's hard to do it in bed.
Why not print it off? Same as an MP3. You burn a CD, print off the story.
It's harder for people. One of the things is that art, if the source file size isn't big enough, if the visual information isn't accurately in the file, it degrades when you print out a hard copy. So for one of the issues is that if you print off Prose, not so much, because you can print off just like turn it into a Word document or something. But with art, I mean, my art is at 72 like DPI as a resolution on the screen. It looks fine on screen. If you print that out, it's going to look terrible. Right. It's going to absolutely look terrible. One of the things I'm hoping to do is just create it into collate it into a PDF so that people could read it, download it, and actually maybe even do high enough quality that they could print it out. But if you're printing out a 145-page book on your printer at home, it's going to take a while. It's going to use a lot of ink. And at that point, you're probably better off buying the book anyway.
It might cost you as much or more than actually buying the book.
Exactly, and you'll hopefully get a nicer edition with a nicely printed bound book than you would ever, Sherlock's binding at your local print shop, is something you downloaded online. And that's where music and like print publishing are very, very different. It's just different technologies, and we haven't quite figured out a way to, maximize that yet.
But do you foresee a day when you can actually, post the comics online, get the same resolution printed out, and create a reading experience that would be the destination, that people wouldn't be thinking of the comic store, they'd be thinking about going to the website and catching up with their favorite monthly comic, daily comic, or to read a graphic novel?
Well, I think it in some senses it has. I mean, there are cartoons online, like Penny Arcade is the one that I think to mind, is that they have millions of viewers, and they've been so successful that they've set up their own convention. And they're courted by the gaming industry, because Penny Arcade is primarily a comic that focuses on the game, on games. I could do something with much higher resolution. The load times would be slower. People do still pay for bandwidth. It's cheaper, but the load times would be a lot slower, because over the internet, the data has to be parsed and translated, still through, basically either cable, high speed, or DSL, or what have you, and it can be slow. And then to print it out, well, it's I don't know. I think what I tend to look at right now is that print on demand is changing traditional offset printing. Right. So offset printing is, somebody prints off 1,000 copies of something and binds them, and hopefully can get them into bookstores and other distribution channels. Yeah. Where print on demand, if somebody wants it, they go, they click, and that book is produced for them and shipped to them.
Right.
And that, I think, is probably where, at least for the short term, where publishing webcomics are going.
The short term, yeah, but the technology changes quickly, and I know people are worried very much about bottlenecks right now as far as the internet goes, but yes. Inevitably some Deus Ex Machina pops out of the technological sky, and we have a solution to a problem that we didn't think we would have 2 years ago. So we can almost bet, come back in 5 or 10 years, and the ground will have shifted. Do you foresee a day when being a virtual comic artist is a practical proposition?
I hope so. I really do. I mean, I think that would be terrific, because I have a soft spot for retail stores, for bookstores and comic book shops, good ones at the very least, because I think they do add something to the community. I think they add something to culture. However, it would be nice to be able to interact with my audience directly at the same time, and not have any middlemen in the way. And I haven't quite figured out a way to do that yet, where I'm not hurting or destroying small business in particular, and small bookstores, small comic book shops, because I think that they are important. They serve us in a way that people can underestimate. But I have biases towards this too. But at the same time is traditional distribution, the marketing, the whole thing that goes into it. I've done it. Is really hard.
How hard is it? Because this is still in process. The road to God knows is still being rolled out on the internet. You're up to what, page 119 now?
Yep, that's it.
And it's 4 pages every Monday.
Yeah.
So like a serial, people are tuning in every Monday to find out what happens this week. But how difficult is it to A, get yourself online and to that size of an audience, and B, to get yourself published, because that's still in the future?
Getting yourself online isn't hard at all. It's actually, the barrier for entry is lower than almost anything I could even imagine. It's unlike, we are in an age that people forget that is unlike anything we've ever experienced before. I mean, anybody can now produce something and get it online. There are a lot of free, easy websites that you can do it with. You can upload things. It's pig easy. It's not hard to do. The craft is a different thing, but just getting stuff out there isn't hard to do. You can put kids' drawings up, really, really simply. But distribution, traditional distribution, even new modes of distribution, that's a very different thing. It's hard. It's even though there's new technologies, print on demand being one of them, that's changing things. It's getting into bookstores, getting into comic book shops. There are a lot of barriers of entry.
You've been working tirelessly. You've been promoting The Road to God Knows when it was still, a work in the early stages.
Yeah.
Why did you do that? Why did you decide to go out and promote something, most of which you hadn't written yet?
Well, I knew from running a bookstore that most books fail. And most first books fail. A lot of people don't realize this, is that the majority of books, like the majority of the dollars that come, billions of dollars in revenue for the book trade, are coming actually from a select group of authors and a select group of publishers. Yeah. Most ISBNs sell less than 1,000 copies a year. 1,000 copies, you're not living on 1,000 copies a year sold. Like, even if you self-publish the bloody thing, the odds are that it's not even like in some cases that's a couple of pizzas. Like, that's it, for the cost of manufacturing plus the discounts you're giving to distributors and retailers. So I knew that for a work like this to find an audience, I had to start it early. Perhaps too early, but that's a tough thing to say. I had to make a decision to go and start marketing it and start sort of promoting it. And I was really worried. I believe very strongly, I'm not the first person to say this, but I believe really strongly that the danger is obscurity. Yeah. I'm never worried about people pirating my work or stealing things or passing it around or anything like that. So I wanted to, nobody's ever heard of me. I'm an unknown author. I'm a Canadian unknown author. I'm a Canadian unknown author with a weird, different book, that's tackling subject matter that most of these don't work, and or most people aren't familiar with. And as much as I believe that there are strengths in that, there are also weaknesses. Yeah. And the weaknesses are, nobody's ever heard of you. Why would somebody read that thing? And I dealt with that as a retailer. Some sales rep would come in and they'd be like, wow, there's this book, I love it, you should try it too. And I'm looking at it going in the catalog going, really, you think? yeah, I don't know about that. Maybe one I could sell. And when you spin that off in your head and you're like, well, if my bookstore, which was fairly progressive, would order, I would order one copy of something. How many stores in North America are ordering onesies and twosies of something?
So how do you get over that? How do you get past that bottleneck between you and the audience?
I wish I knew. I really don't. There are no simple answers. There's no simple solution. Nobody has figured out a magical way of doing it. You do good work, you do work that you stand by, you do work with a sense of craft, and you hope to God that you're not like Van Gogh and that people will actually support you early. It takes time. A lot of first books fail, and I risk that going into something like this, right. And I've had to sort of face the reality of The Road to God Knows may not do very well, and it may be something like, the best case scenario, or one of the best case scenarios might be that 10 years from now, when I'm much more established, then I can re-bring it out or, what have you, and look, first book, out it comes. You don't know. I wish there was a way. I ran a bookstore, I talked to many sales reps, I saw books sell. Why do certain things work? Why does the public, which is almost like a group, why do people catch on to something and yet something else that I believe would have merit fails? Yeah. We don't know. The only thing I'll say is that there are certain things that help. Awards help. Oprah certainly helps. As crass as it is. There's certain things, there's a difference between a book that wins a Governor General's Award and the ones that's not. Elizabeth Hay, who has become a very famous author and is an Ottawa author, I remember her coming in with Small Change, her little short story collection, into my bookstore. And wasn't that she was
bestseller now?
Yeah, go figure. And that's an excellent example of a book that was repackaged later on. It was done by a little literary press. I think it was Porcupine's Quill, and it was subsequently repackaged, I think, from a different publisher. But things happen, and it was the fact that she didn't have profile something that meant her work didn't have merit? Of course not. But how do you find out who somebody like that is? You keep hammering at walls, and the walls for traditional print distribution are very high. Comics, because comics are, the direct market is different, is a separate channel from the book trade, they have their own unique problems. And one of the problems, it's also its strength, is that retailers buy non-returnably from one company, right. Diamond Distribution. Diamond Distribution is a functioning monopoly in North America. People don't realize that. They don't realize where their comics come from. It's a functional monopoly. And on top of it, it's a monopoly with functional dominance with Marvel, DC, Dark Horse, and Image.
Well, I'll
It's
tell you
tough.
what, one thing that does break monopolies is cyberspace.
Yes.
And we just want to remind everybody that the website is vaughnallan.com. That's vaughnallan.com. Check it out. Check out his artwork and check out the links to his full-length graphic novel, The Road to God Knows Where. I've really enjoyed talking to you, Vaughn. Best of luck with the graphic novel and
Thanks
everything
very
in the
much.
future.
Thank you.
And we hope to have you come back and tell us about it when it happens, all right?
That'd be great.
All right. Hope you come back too. We've enjoyed having you, and we will see you again soon. We'll see you later.